I hope from next week, maybe, not next week, sorry, on Friday. So on Friday at this time, do you have a class? On Friday, do we have a class at this time? Okay, so is it possible we can do that cut from 11 on Friday? So I set it on Friday 11. Felix and Joseph, is it possible? I set it on Friday and on at 11. Okay, so I have an answer from Felix that we can do that cut. Okay, so I think we are in consensus that we can do that cut on Friday 11. And I hope the system will be okay because we had an issue yesterday. And that's why we have said it's good we postpone the cuts. So I wanted us to start with a recap on what we did last time, so that next week. I hope next week you are doing your mock exam. Is it true? Are you aware that next week maybe we will be starting with the mock? Are you aware? The January, April exam, early term exam.
No, we are not aware.
Okay, I will confirm. If it will not be there, I'll tell you in advance. I'll tell you in advance. So when you are supposed to sit for those exams. But let us try to do a recap on what we did last time. And if I can go back to your portal, because I want us to use the portal, maybe you can, let me first of all share the screen. Let me share the screen. So I think if you look at the screen that I have now, so I think you can see that screen. Those are the notes that are on your portal. And if you look at most of the notes that are there, we have already tackled these topics. And where we started with arrays, and we started with one-dimensional array, where we said we are only using a fixed representation of data. And this is where some data will not change. So the moment you allocate a memory it cannot be changed unless you want to have varying values that changes frequently. But for a two-dimensional array, I remember we were looking at rows and columns. And that's why specifically we say that we can present rows and columns, where rows are presenting the data that are controlling the columns. And that's why we say when you're using the multi-dimensional array, we always use what you call two loops. We use two loops. And when you're using two loops, where we have an inner loop and an outer loop. So the outer loop is the one that is controlling the inner loop. And that's why we say the first thing that we need to understand within that, let me maybe try to analyze on that. We said if you're using the arrays, you have to make sure that you know how to define an array. So can you define an array? And how can you define? So first of all, you need to look at definition of an array. And what we said about an array, I think we need to brainstorm on this, on what we said about arrays. So is there anybody with an answer on what we said about arrays? Is there anybody with an answer for that? Maybe we can start with Felix. Do you have an answer for that? What is an array? According to you.
group of elements together that has the same name and same type.
Yes, the group of elements that has the same name and the same type. Suppose now I use something like this. Maybe we can try to understand array, because arrays is the one that are most used in programming. Suppose I say I have int student, and this student I give it a fixed array of 2. And then when I'm referring to this, maybe I use scanf. So where I use scanf, instead of using student, maybe I use students. So that is a presentation of something that has already been changed. So this is not an array. That cannot be an array. That cannot be a representation or cannot be an input for an array. So array should always be having the same name. So when you're referring to student, should not be referring to other elements. So that is clear on that. And that's why we are saying, if you look at what we are supposed to look at in a presentation, we need to know on how we can define array, of which we have understood that. Then we need to look at now what you call the syntax of an array. And when you look at the syntax of an array, I remember we said we use type, then we have array name, then we have size inside it, and we close that, then we have a semicolon. So if you look at this, we are having an array of a given type, where we say that this array can be either a character, it can be either an integer, or it can either be a float, or it can be either a double. So it depends with the character that you want to have within the presentation. So our type is now this, and when you talk about types, this one we are referring to what you call the data types. The data types. We are referring to what you call the data types. So we have data types array. Like now we have said integer student. So we have how many students are we having? But we want to do something with this student. So that is what we said. And in this case, we say this is what you call a fixed dimensional array. A fixed dimensional array. So in that case, so the next one that we said we have is what we call the next one that we said is what we can have. So what we said about these arrays is where we can have what you call a two-dimensional array, and we said we have type, then we can have array name, then within that we have the first size 1, then we have another one, we have size 2, So in this case, we are having an array of two-dimensional arrays. Like now, let me maybe present a matrix, a program on matrix, a 2x2 matrix. And I think you know what is a 2x2 matrix. Is that clear? Do you know what is a 2x2 matrix? Onyango, Felix, any issue on a 2x2 matrix? I think you are doing mathematics now. Any issue on a 2x2 matrix? So you know what is a 2x2 matrix? I'm waiting for an answer. We continue. Okay, so Felix, oh, no issue. Okay, so we can maybe look at a program. Like now, if you're using a 2x2 matrix, let's say maybe I have 4, I have 6, then I have the next one that I have, maybe I can have 5, then I can have 7 on that. So in this case, we are looking at a presentation of where this is an array having how many rows? 1, 2 rows and 2 columns. So the moment I'm presenting an array, I will be able to say for a given counter that you have already initialized, I is equals to 1 or I is equals to 0, I is equals to 1, I is less than or equal to I plus plus, I plus plus. Then we open this. Then we can have, maybe for one, let's say maybe I use a row. Maybe I use row. The other one I use a row. The other one I use a row. So for this case, I want to use now a column. So I can use a column. And this now becomes a column. Maybe I can say call. The next one I can call. And the next one I can say it is another call. So that is a tool. So if you look at your question paper, and I have said that there is a message that I wrote to you, so you should have those past papers. There is a question that we have a matrix. And there is now a presentation of a matrix of a 2 by 2. Suppose you are told suppose you are told to add 2 matrices of a 2 by 2. So we are assuming whatever we are supposed to add, we are supposed to add 9. And then maybe we have 6. Then you press enter. Then you have 7. Maybe let me use a table. Sorry. So for this case, if this is a matrix, maybe I insert a row and columns. Maybe a table. 2. Maybe I have another one like that. Let me clear this. Suppose I have 4 here, and I have 3 here, and I have 5, and maybe I have 9. Then I have another array of 7, 9, 8, 4, or 5. So if somebody tells you now to come and add this, maybe we use a plus. Maybe we plus. So what am I saying? I'm saying if you're using Paint, maybe for a clear presentation on that, if I have this 2 by 2 matrix, maybe I have 4, I have 5, I have 6, and I have 7. I want to add this, and these are arrays. Then I want to add another array of 6, 8, 9, and 10. How will I add this? So automatically, if I want to get the first row in the first column, I add 4 plus 6. So I automatically say this is 10. 5 and 8, this becomes 13. Then 6 and that, this becomes 15. This and this becomes 17. So if you look at this presentation, we are saying we have added a 2 by 2 matrix. Remember here we have been given values. So we can say, suppose we are given values. And we want to come up with a 2. Maybe the question is, write a stub in C programming, that adds 2 matrices of a 2 by 2 over 2 by 2. So in this case, if this is a 2 by 2 matrix, we know that we don't have the inputs. Suppose now we have the inputs that we are supposed to have, and we are assuming that the inputs are this. The inputs that we are supposed to add are these. So in our case, when you are writing this program, what are we supposed to consider? So the first one is now how to declare an array. And I want to start from declaration, and I say int element size. Maybe we can say these are e size, and these are element size of 2 by 2. So if this was a 2 by 3, if this was a 2 by 3, now here it's supposed to be 3. If this was a 2 by 3 or 3 by 4, so it means that we have to change like this. So we are having 2 rows and 3 columns, 2 rows and 3 columns. But let us first of all assume that we are having a 2 by 2 matrix. So in this case, we now have the values. Remember, we have already been given the values here. If you have been given the values, let's assume we have been given the values. We have 4, 5, 3, and 9. So in this case, we have now to come and declare these arrays. So we have the first value is 4, 5, 3, and 9. We have 4, 4, 5, 3, and 9. So in that, for the second array that we are having, now we have to come up with our second array. So coming up with our second array now defines that we need to have some presentation of these elements. So what we need to do is that we need now to first of all say we have array A, which is a 2 by 2 matrix. And maybe the values we have been given, the way we have declared them. Then we can have another one, which we can call it the array B. We can call it the array B. So we can have int B, then this is a 2 by 2. This is a 2 by 2. So we want to add this array and this array, whereas maybe if you are using the values, we want to use these values. Let's assume that these are the values that we have. So in this case, we now say is equals to, we have 4, 5, 3, and 9. So this is the first array. What about the second array? So with the second array, we can still say we are having 7, 9, 8, 5. 7, 9, 8, 5. Then we close that. So remember, for this case, we need still to add this array. So it's like we are saying A plus B. So we need to have maybe int sum array of 2 by 2. Array of 2 by 2. Array of 2 by 2. I think we are together up to that point. So are we getting up to that point? The moment you want to declare array using matrices. Are we together? Okay. So I think I can continue on that. So what we are saying is that now we have already declared a sum, which is supposed now to add a 2 by 2 matrices. So in this case, we now need to introduce a loop. But for you to introduce a loop, we need rows and we need columns. So let me represent rows with R and row columns with C. So we say for R is equals to 1. We assume we are starting with, we can still say 0. 1 row is less than or equal to how many rows? 2. 1, 2. So then R plus plus. So I think up to now, you know why we are using R plus plus. It's because now we are starting from the small to the highest. Then here, allow me to copy paste this. And when I copy paste this, I will be able now to change this to be column instead of rows, columns. Up to now, you know why we are using column less than or equal to 2. So we are adding equal matrices. We are adding equal matrices. So now we can now introduce sum. Sum into R into column is equals to A, which is in capital A, into R into column, plus B into row into column. Then we close that. So automatically, we have already done this. Now, if you want to do this, we can now introduce gaps. And for you to introduce gaps, we are introducing the gap from 4 to 5. So when you're introducing this gap from 4 to 5, we know how we can be able to look at that. Still, we still need to look at now, when you add the first one, we have the next line. So for this case, I want to introduce a gap, print F. Then for this case, I can introduce a gap by horizontal tabulation. So for this case, I'm using a horizontal tabulation because when I add the first one, I add the second one, I have a new presentation of element. Then within here, I can now introduce a new line. So let me introduce a new line. So in this case, I will use N. Remember here we don't have an output. So we can say percentage D, comma, we introduce sum into R into column, So in this case, we have already added the sum, and then after adding the sum, we have now introduced the output for this sum with a horizontal tabulation. So when you add the first row, now the moment we are going to the next column, we find there is a new line. So when you add the first row with the first column, introduce the new line. Then we move to the next column. So for this case, we end at that point. So what we will have something like this, where we had already added these arrays. If you look at this, so you'll be having something like this in our own presentation if you're adding this element. But now, we can still complicate this question, and maybe allow me to complicate in this way. So these notes are still in your portal. I have recorded them, and you still see them in your portal. We can still download that. Let's say maybe I have a new slide, and the question is, we are using maybe 2 by 2 matrix, and drew a console. So in this case, we are allowing the user now to enter these values. And what we need to do is to allow the user to enter the first array and the second array. So allow me to use the same presentation up to that point, where now we can have this element and we say, we have already introduced the first row and we have introduced the first column. But when we introduce this first row, we now allow user to enter the first row. So we say printf enter the array elements. Enter the array elements. So maybe we can still have a new line somewhere here. Then we have that. Then we can have scanf. Then we have %d. Then we have a into row into column. A into row into column. So you close that. A into rows into column. So already we have entered the first row, the first array. What about now the second array? So if you enter the second, so we can say, inputs for the first array. For the first array, that is array A. That is array A. What if now I want to enter array B? I still now need the same presentation of array. So maybe we can copy from this point. You copy that. Then up to this point, we can now introduce, maybe we say this enter the array B. But here, now we change this to array B. We change that to array B. So I have two arrays. One array is where we have A, and the next one is where we have B. So in this case, what we can say is that we are having two arrays now. But what about the sum? So that's why we need to calculate the sum for these arrays, and we'll be able to understand what we are having on this. So in this case, I want to introduce now an array that allows me to maybe to come up with summation. So allow me, please, to use the next connection in the next array. So for this case now, allow me to introduce. So for this is array A and this is array B. Now allow me to introduce a new slide. And this slide now, I copy paste this, where this one will be for the sum. This will be for the sum. For the sum array. For the sum array. So in this case, we don't need an input. So for this case, I only require an output. I only require an output. So where we say sum into R into C is equals to array A into R into C. That. Then, if you look at what we did in the previous one, we just said, let's have an output. So I want to just copy the whole of this. And then I put it somewhere here. So for this case, what we are saying is, we are adding array A and array B, but we need now to get the output of the sum, and we give it in rows and columns. So meaning that we have to use what you call a tabulation. So in a simple way, when you're using tabulation, we are saying, let us present rows and columns, but we space them now the way we have spaced here. So we space them the way we have spaced here. This element from this element, this element from this element, and this element from this element to this. So this one you have used tabulation. Tab, we have used tab, but here we have used a new line. We have used a new line. So in this case now, we can say our presentation that we have here, we are having a 2 by 2 matrices. I want somebody to explain with this, and maybe can write somewhere, or you use an email, you use a message, or you can still use your mic, maybe to answer that. Somebody to explain on a 3 by 4 matrix. 3 by 4 matrix. So can you explain that? Explain as we continue. Use SMS or switch on your mic. Switch on your mic. So you can either use that or you switch on your mic, or you can switch on your mic. So for this case, I want answers for that. Just interpret how you mean, what we mean by 3 by 4 matrix. Please, somebody can explain? So I'm waiting. So 3 rows and 4 columns. Yes, that is correct. So that is correct. Remember here, it's like we are saying, maybe if I use a new line, it's like we are saying we have 3 rows. Maybe this is the first value, the second value, and the third value. Then 3 rows, 4 columns. 1, 2, 4. So these are 1, 2, 3. Then here I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is correct. So when you're presenting with 3 rows, 3 columns. So I think that is okay. So answered. Suppose now, using the same presentation, somebody tells you, using a 3 by 4 matrix, using a 3 by 4 matrix via input console, not that, maybe using input console, using an input console, first, the program should ask how many, or should ask the type of matrix to work with. So that is the second question. So if you look at this, and I want to look at that. So if you look at this question, using an input console, first the program should ask the user the type of matrix to work with. So for this case, you have not been told the number of matrices to work with. It's up to you to ask yourself whether I want to work with 3 by 3, 50 by 50, 60 by 70, 90 by 1. So this is the case that you have to ask yourself. And for this case, because I want to explain this, is where we can now introduce a loop. Maybe we can say int matrix. Maybe we say array B. Maybe we have array. We have A. Maybe we have array. But this array, we don't know the number of users that you are supposed to work with. So for this case, let me first of all have a value. Maybe we can call it F, and we call it rows. Maybe we can have columns. So for this one is how many arrays do I want to work with? Or how many numbers of arrays do I want to work with? So for this case, this is array. So I can have int r, int, that is a loop, and I can have d and another f maybe. So where I say maybe for d is equals to 0 or 1, d is less than maybe or equal to the number of rows that you want to work with, then d plus plus. So in this case, we are saying these arrays are greater than the rows that you want to work with. So for this case, we can have another one. Maybe we can call it F. And this one, we can call it another F. This one, instead of having R, you call it now C. This one, you have F. So how many rows do you want to work with? Maximized by R, maximized by the counter R, maximized by the counter C, given on that. So I want you to try this program, and at your own time, maybe if there is a question, you can raise this question. Where now here, I should have inputs. Here I should have inputs for how many? Maybe we can say printf. Printf, how many array to work with? How many arrays to work with? And you can have scanf. Well, scanf is supposed to have percentage %d. Then we need to have what you call a $sign. But this $sign now, it should have array F. Remember, it is F into D into F in that. So we'll be able to clearly state how it's supposed to work on that. So I want you to try that program, maybe you can see how it is supposed to work within a given type. So the next one that we discussed was on presentation. Mostly we discussed on presentation. So we look at the presentation of these arrays in a form of how these arrays are supposed to be combined. So that's why we say when you're using a two-dimensional arrays, assist mostly when we are looking at multiple presentation of data, in multiple presentation of data. So I think if you look at your notes, if I'm not wrong, if I can look at these notes. So we already talked about the two-dimensional array, how it's supposed to be stored in a memory, and different presentation of these memories, and how they are supposed to access. So in our case, if you can go back to the first thing, we have already looked at the syntax, and we have still looked at the array memory. We have looked at the array memory, mostly the spacing. We can say the spacing in memory, how we are supposed to allocate that. And I think up to that point, we are able now to know that the array is the one that uses less memory. It uses less memory utilization, and it is faster in execution. When you're executing, it is very fast, and we can be able to execute more data at a given point in that. So for up to that point, I want maybe somebody to ask a question. I want somebody to ask a question before we proceed. And because I had planned today, we are supposed to do cut, of which now there is a mail that has been sent. We should not do cut today. So I had planned for this cut. But if you have a question first, you can ask on arrays. And that's why I've insisted on arrays, because in most cases, we use arrays in various presentations. Remember that there is a topic that you're supposed to discuss on sorting and searching. So in this one, you can still use arrays. And still in pointers, you can still use arrays in that. So I'm waiting for any questions. I'm waiting for questions, please. So let's start with Felix, Onyango, Peter. So I have an answer from Felix. No question. Onyango. Peter, I think you have joined late. So you are doing a recap. Is there any question up to that point? Peter, do you have any question? Okay. So up to that, we don't have any question. So I want us to move away from this platform. And before we move away from this platform, I want us to go to our chat room. Maybe we can, I will post a question that we are supposed to do. Just write that question. And maybe if you have, I will set a quiz on that. Maybe if you have a question, you can raise after that. And I want us to do that quiz first. I want us to do that quiz. Then after that, we will be able to go to the chat room. We can chat a bit and be able to maybe ask a question from that point if you have any question. So can we move to the chat room? Can we move to the chat room? Because today I wanted to have a recap. The next time we will be starting with what you call functions. You'll start with functions. Any question? Okay, we can move to the chat room. There is a question that I will pose there. You can do it. You do it first. Then after that, from that question, we will be able now to ask other questions on behalf. Huh? So allow me to go to the chat room. So let us meet there, please. Thank you.